Way back on April 23rd of 2015, I requested and received a review code for Aaru's Awakening on the Xbox One. It has taken 2 years, but this video and the 2 following reviews should ultimately explain my hiatus. Aaru's Awakening is a 2D platformer which involves non-traditional movement mechanics and a stylized, hand-drawn artistic theme. There are a total of 23 stages, including both the tutorial level and 4 boss battles. What is blatantly most notable about Aaru is of course the visual style. All levels are dominated by strong usages of just a few colors, and on its own this is rather striking. In motion, however, most of the animation and variation comes from the panning of layered backgrounds as you progress across the stage. There are some aspects of stages with moving parts of scenery, but not enough to create anything resembling a living, breathing world. I don't mean to discredit the art direction, as I'm extremely fond of it, primarily the pencil marks on Aaru the protagonist. I do feel though that just a bit more polish in the animation and level of detail would help the game seem more fluid and less obviously a game developed using the Unity engine. Speaking on gameplay, Aaru follows some core principles of the genre, but with some definite variation. For starters, most levels task the player with reaching the end of the stage, almost always on the right side of the screen. You can of course jump to reach higher platforms, but most of the navigation comes from the usage of charging and teleporting. Charging allows for a one-use dash after a jump that can destroy certain obstacles. Its usage is also absolutely necessary to reach certain platforms that couldn't be reached with a regular jump. The second unique gameplay function, teleportation, works by shooting an orb in any direction, then pressing another button to warp to that location of the orb. This has to be done rather quickly, as the orb does not stop on its own, and most stage hazards destroy the orb. In other words, several stages in the game have you somewhat constantly shooting an orb and teleporting to it, both to traverse quickly and to maneuver around stage geometry. What makes this less enjoyable than it sounds in writing is the hyper-specific shots you're often required to make in order to progress. Despite having a movement system that allows for freeform control, there are very rarely, if ever, multiple ways of handling a single problem. I value that platformers must adhere to certain rules, but not being able to explore the movement structure further due to very narrow gameplay quarters has this feeling like you're only able to replicate the intended path the developers carve for you, with little to no freedom of experimentation. On my first playthrough, I was completely dissatisfied with the core platforming of Aaru. I found that most stages are more frustrating than fun, and my only goal was to see the game's credits and be done with it. When I eventually returned after some time to record gameplay, I managed to replay the entire game in a fraction of my former time, acquiring all the time to gold medals in the process. I can attribute this to a few things, most notably my late realization that Aaru's teleport can be used to destroy most enemies in the game. Previously, I was attempting to avoid all enemies, as walking into them or being hit by a projectile is a one-hit kill that resets you to the most recent checkpoint. This attack method is told to you immediately upon acquiring the ability, and I am ultimately on the fence if blaming the minimalistic tutorial pop-ups can be to blame. The other realization that came all too late was that teleportation does not grant momentum. Teleporting to a new location resets your speed, meaning you should use it slowly and methodically. I was being rather careless and attempting to play the game much too quickly than was necessary, resulting in constant deaths on obstacles and to enemies. I did, however, come across some exceptions to this rule where teleporting would have me still mobile. I can't tell if this is a glitch or dependent on your action before teleporting. Having managed to finish all 23 stages and under their developer set part time, I can appreciate what they were going for with this kind of unique platforming. I believe that in certain scenarios, primarily the game's first 2 proper worlds, Day and Dusk, this form of level traversal can be a lot of fun. Unfortunately, as the levels begin to add more and more hazards giving less room for comfort, it becomes less about quickly speeding through stages and more about slowly ensuring you do not get hit by unclear hitboxes and annoying death traps. If I were to change something, I believe the teleportation orb should allow the camera to pan outwards. This way it's more clear where you're going and before jumping into an unknown situation. While it might reduce difficulty, it would allow for far less cheap deaths based on level unfamiliarity. From a mechanical point of view, I also wish dying did not force a loading screen that varies in length. Super Meat Boy perfected this idea by having players respawn after death almost instantly. The loading screen penalty for dying in Aaru seems to average 2 to 5 seconds, and is accompanied by a rather out-of-place image of a skull. Lastly, given the attached narrative of the game, I feel an alternate difficulty where death does not occur after one hit from enemies would be to the game's benefit. That said, Aaru's Awakening's story is blatantly simplistic. and for that I doubt its necessity. On my second playthrough, I wasn't forced to watch this game's many cutscenes in between worlds, and this difference greatly affected my level of enjoyment. The story itself has been done before and can be summarized as, a protagonist blindly follows orders from a godlike being. With the story and narrated cutscenes removed, I feel nothing of worth would honestly be lost. It actually promotes allowing the artwork to tell a story by keeping the player in front of it for longer, more focused periods of time. Splitting up stages with a slow and dreadfully boring plot is a disservice to the good parts of the game. What aspects of this game's story are not dedicated to unoriginal deception focus on gaming's classic usage of 4 elemental temples. To have such a cliché plot is a waste, and removing it would improve the game in my opinion. Perhaps the story was added for padding out the length, but this is not a very long game. My second playthrough lasting somewhere around 2 hours even after replaying some stages numerous times. Also, consider that 7 of the 23 stages are tutorials and bosses, thereby leaving a very slim amount of content considering the attached price tag. There is a noticeable juxtaposition between the overall length of the game and the numerous long, drawn-out cutscenes. While saying platformers don't require plots could be a tad naive, this particular story detracts from the overall experience. Aaru's Awakening is littered with problems, but at the core of it all seems to be the refusal to develop a game that is fun. I am extremely fond of the game's artwork and style, but its presentation, gameplay, boss battles, soundtrack, and story are all mediocre. Perhaps attempting to make a difficult 2D platformer was not the best usage of these artistic assets. The game's teleportation and charge abilities are fun in a vacuum, but coupled with the poor and frustrating level design, makes for what can only be called an unenjoyable experience that I cannot recommend to anyone.